The dusty saloon reeked of stale whiskey and sweat, its wooden floorboards creaking under the weight of staggering boots. A raucous crowd filled the dimly lit room, their laughter and slurred insults blending into a chaotic hum. At a corner table, slumped over a half-empty bottle, was Amos, a man whose bloodshot eyes and trembling hands betrayed a life drowned in liquor. His daughter, Leela, sat quietly beside him, her delicate fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. She was deaf, her world silent, but her eyes as sharp and observant to miss nothing. The saloon's patrons barely noticed her, their attention drawn to Amos's increasingly loud rants. "She's no use to me," he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table, causing Leela to flinch. "Deaf as a stone. Take her, anyone, for a price." The crowd jeered, some tossing coins mockingly, while Leela's face remained still, her gaze fixed on her father's contorted features. Across the room, a towering figure stood in the shadows, his broad shoulders cloaked in a woven blanket adorned with intricate patterns. Known only as Giant Apache, his presence commanded silence from those who noticed him. His dark eyes, deep as canyon wells, locked onto Leela, reading her quiet strength. The air grew heavy as Amos's shouts grew louder, his desperation palpable. "Take her," he slurred again, pointing at Leela, who sat motionless, her hands now folded tightly in her lap. The giant's jaw tightened, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife tucked into his belt. He stepped forward, his moccasins silent on the floor, and the crowd parted instinctively. "I know her worth," he whispered, his voice low, like the rustle of desert wind through mesquite. Amos froze, his drunken bravado faltering under the giant's piercing gaze. Leela's eyes darted to the stranger, her heart pounding, sensing a shift in the air. The saloon's den faded as the giant's presence seemed to pull the room into his orbit. He leaned closer to Amos, his whisper carrying a weight that silenced the older man. "She's not yours to sell." The words hung like a storm cloud, and Leela, though unable to hear, felt their power in the way her father shrank back. The giant's hand hovered near his knife, but his eyes never left Leela, as if speaking to her alone. The crowd held its breath, sensing a confrontation brewing, but the giant's calm was unnerving, his stillness a promise of something greater than violence. Leela's fingers twitched, assigning a question to herself, her eyes searching the giant's face for answers. The saloon, once a cacophony of chaos, now teetered on the edge of something profound, as if the desert itself had stepped inside to claim its own. Paragraph 2. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a sky bruised with twilight, the horizon glowing faintly where the sun had just slipped away. Leela stepped out of the saloon, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill, her breath visible in the cooling air. The giant followed, his massive frame moving with a grace that belied his size. Amos stumbled behind, muttering curses, his bottle clutched like a lifeline. Leela's eyes scanned the barren landscape, the silhouettes of cacti standing like sentinels against the fading light. She couldn't hear the crunch of gravel underfoot or the distant howl of a coyote, but she felt the vibrations of the world around her, a language she'd learned to read in her silence. The giant stopped a few paces away, his gaze sweeping the horizon before settling on her. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice a low rumble, though Leela only saw the movement of his lips. She tilted her head, her hands moving swiftly to sign a response, her fingers dancing with a quiet defiance. The giant watched, his expression unreadable, then nodded, as if he understood her unspoken words. Amos, swaying on his feet, pointed a shaky finger at the giant. "You think you can take her? She's mine," he spat, his voice cracking with desperation. The giant's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond, his silence a wall Amos couldn't breach. Leela stepped closer to the giant, her eyes searching his face, sensing a kindness beneath his stoic exterior. The desert wind carried the scent of sage, and Leela inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the moment. The giant gestured toward the horizon, where a faint glow marked a distant settlement. "There's a place for you," he said, his words meant for Leela, though she read them in the tilt of his head, the gentleness in his eyes. Amos lurched forward, grabbing Leela's arm, but the giant's hand shot out, catching Amos's wrist with a grip like iron. "Let her go," the giant said, his voice a low growl that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Amos stumbled back, fear flickering in his eyes. Leela pulled free, her hands signing rapidly, her expression fierce. The giant watched her, his face softening, and for a moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The stars began to emerge, pinpricks of light in the vast sky, and Leela felt a pull toward the unknown, toward the man who seemed to see her in a way no one else ever had. Paragraph 3. The trio moved through the desert, the giant leading the way with a steady stride, his blanket swaying like a banner. Leela followed, her steps light but deliberate, her eyes darting between the giant and the endless expanse of sand and stone. Amos trailed behind, his drunken muttering a constant drone, though Leela felt only the vibrations of his voice through the ground. The night was alive with sounds she couldn't hear: crickets, the rustle of tumbleweeds, the distant cry of a hawk, but she sensed the world's pulse in the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The giant carried a small leather pouch, its contents clinking softly with each step, and Leela wondered what secrets it held. They stopped at a rocky outcrop, where the giant knelt, his fingers brushing the earth as if greeting an old friend. He drew a small circle in the sand, placing a polished stone at its center, and Leela watched, fascinated, her hands still at her sides. Amos, impatient, kicked up the dirt. "What's this nonsense? You think you're some kind of shaman?" he sneered, but the giant ignored him, his focus on Leela. He signed a single word slowly, deliberately, his hands forming the shape of home. Leela's breath caught, her eyes widening, for no one had ever signed to her before. She signed back, her fingers trembling with emotion, asking, "Where?" The giant pointed to the distant globe, now brighter against the night sky, and Leela felt a spark of hope ignite within her. Amos, oblivious, stumbled over a rock, cursing loudly. The giant rose, his presence towering, and gestured for Leela to sit beside him. She did, her hands resting on her knees, her eyes locked on his. He began to tell a story, his hands moving in a blend of signs and gestures, weaving a tale of a people who lived in harmony with the desert, who valued silence as much as sound. Leela's heart swelled, for in his words she saw a world where her deafness was not a burden but a gift. Amos scoffed, but his voice was growing weaker, his resolve crumbling under the weight of the giant's quiet authority. The desert seemed to listen, its vastness amplifying the moment, and Leela felt a connection to the land she'd never known before. The giant's story ended, but his eyes held a promise, and Leela knew she was on the cusp of something new, something that could redefine her life. Paragraph 4. Dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, the light catching the edges of distant mesas. The giant led Leela and Amos toward a narrow canyon, its walls rising like ancient guardians. Leela's bare feet felt the coolness of the sand, each grain a reminder of the world's quiet beauty. She walked beside the giant, her trust in him growing with every step, though questions swirled in her mind. Who was he? Why did he care for her, a stranger? Amos lagged behind, his complaints reduced to a hoarse whisper, his bottle now empty and discarded. The giant's pace never faltered, his eyes scanning the canyon's shadows, alert for danger. Leela noticed his vigilance, her own senses heightened, reading the world through sight and touch. At a bend in the canyon, they came upon a small spring, its water sparkling in the morning light. The giant knelt, filling a canteen, and offered it to Leela. She drank deeply, the water cool and sweet, and signed her thanks, her hands moving with grace. The giant smiled, a rare expression that softened his rugged features, and signed back, "You're welcome." Amos, jealous of their exchange, muttered something unintelligible, but the giant's glance silenced him. They rested by the spring, and the giant pulled a small flute from his pouch, its wood carved with intricate designs. He played a soft melody, the notes vibrating through the air, and though Leela couldn't hear them, she felt the rhythm in the way the giant's fingers moved, in the gentle sway of his body. Her hands signed a question, "What is this place?" The giant set the flute down and signed, "A place of beginnings." Leela's heart raced, sensing the weight of his words. The canyon seemed to hum with life, its walls etched with stories of those who had come before. The giant stood, gesturing for them to continue, and Leela followed, her steps lighter now, as if the desert itself were carrying her forward. Amos, weakened by the journey, stumbled but kept pace, his eyes darting nervously. The canyon opened into a wider valley, where a cluster of adobe homes stood, their walls glowing in the sunlight. Leela's breath caught, her hands signing rapidly, asking if this was the place the giant had spoken of. He nodded, his eyes warm, and Leela felt a surge of hope, tempered by the fear of what lay ahead. The village was alive with movement of women weaving baskets, children chasing each other through narrow paths, elders sitting in the shade, their eyes wise with years. Leela stood at the edge, her heart pounding as she took in the scene. The giant led her forward, his hand gently guiding her, while Amos hung back, his face a mix of resentment and exhaustion. The villagers paused, their eyes curious but kind, and Leela felt their gazes like a warm embrace. An older woman approached, her hair streaked with silver, her hands moving in signs that welcomed Leela. "You are safe here," she signed, and Leela's eyes filled with tears, overwhelmed by the gesture. The giant spoke softly to the woman, his voice too low for Amos to hear, but Leela caught the shape of his words, sensing they were about her. The woman nodded, her smile broadening, and beckoned Leela toward a small adobe home. Inside, the air was cool, scented with herbs, and Leela felt a peace she'd never known. The giant stayed by the door, watching as the woman showed Leela a woven mat where she could rest. Amos, ignored, slumped against a wall outside, his presence a fading shadow. Leela signed to the giant, asking why he'd brought her here, and he replied, his hand steady, "Because you belong." The words struck her deeply, and she sat, her hands trembling as she processed the idea of belonging. The woman brought her a bowl of stew, its warmth comforting, and Leela ate slowly, savoring the taste of a new beginning. Outside, the village hummed with life, and Leela felt the vibrations of footsteps, of laughter she couldn't hear but could sense. The giant stepped outside, speaking to the villagers, and Leela watched through the window, her heart torn between gratitude and uncertainty. Amos's voice rose, weak but angry, demanding to know what was happening, but the villagers ignored him, their focus on Leela. The giant returned, his eyes meeting hers, and signed, "This is your home now, if you choose it." Leela's hands hesitated, then signed a single word, "Stay." The giant's face softened, and he nodded, a silent promise. The village seemed to glow in the midday sun, its walls a testament to resilience, and Leela felt a spark of courage, ready to embrace whatever came next. Paragraph 6. The days in the village passed like a dream, each one blending into the next as Leela learned the rhythms of her new home. She woke with the sun, her hands eager to join the women in their work grinding corn, weaving, tending to small gardens tucked between adobe walls. Her deafness, once a barrier, became a bridge, her hands speaking a language the villagers embraced. The giant, ever watchful, taught her signs unique to his people, each gesture a thread in the tapestry of their history. Leela's fingers moved with growing confidence, her silence a canvas for stories she'd never been able to share. Amos lingered on the village's edge, his presence tolerated but unwelcome, his drunken rants met with quiet disdain. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fiery hues, Leela sat with the giant by a fire, its crackling warmth a contrast to the cool desert night. He told her of his past, his hands weaving a tale of loss and redemption, of a family taken by sickness, of a vow to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Leela listened, her eyes tracing his scars, each one a chapter in his story. She signed, asking why he'd chosen her, and he paused, his hands still, before signing, "Because I saw myself in you." The words hit her like a gust of wind, and she leaned closer, the firelight dancing in her eyes. The village elders joined them, their faces lined with wisdom, and shared stories of the desert, of spirits that guarded the land. Leela felt their words in the rhythm of their gestures, in the way the fire seemed to pulse with their voices. Amos, lurking nearby, overheard fragments and scoffed, but his voice was drowned by the community's strength. Leela's heart swelled, her fear of her father fading like a shadow in the light. She signed to the giant, asking if she could stay forever, and he smiled, his hands signing, "This is your place." The fire crackled, the stars above bright, and Leela felt rooted, her silence no longer a void but a space filled with connection. The village, with its warmth and resilience, was becoming her world, and the giant, her guide, was the anchor she'd never had. Paragraph 7. A storm rolled in, dark clouds swallowing the stars, the desert air heavy with the promise of rain. Leela stood at the village's edge, her shawl whipping in the wind, her eyes scanning the horizon where lightning flickered. The giant stood beside her, his presence steady, his blanket pulled tight against the gusts. The villagers prepared for the storm, securing homes and gathering supplies, their movements calm but purposeful. Amos, restless and agitated, paced nearby, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and defiance. "This place ain't right," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the wind. Leela felt the ground tremble with the storm's approach, her senses alive to the world's pulse. The giant signed to her, his hand steady. "The storm tests us, but it also cleanses." Leela nodded, her hands signing back. "I'm ready." The first drops fell, heavy and cold, and the villagers gathered in a central courtyard, their faces turned to the sky. An elder began a chant, her hands moving in rhythm, and Leela felt the vibrations, her heart sinking with the desert's song. The giant led her to a sheltered spot, where they watched the rain transform the dry earth into a canvas of rivulets. Amos, soaked and shivering, approached, his voice desperate. "You can't keep her. She's mine," he yelled, but the giant's gaze silenced him, his hand raised in warning. Leela stepped forward, her hands signing with a fierceness that surprised even her. "I choose my path," she signed, her eyes locked on her father's. Amos staggered back, the rain washing away his bravado, leaving him small and broken. The giant placed a hand on Leela's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, and she felt a surge of strength. The storm raged, but the village stood firm, its people united. Leela signed to the giant, asking if the storm would pass, and he nodded, his hands signing, "It always does." The rain fell harder, but Leela felt alive, her silence a shield, her connection to the village a fire that no storm could extinguish. The desert, with its raw power, seemed to bless her choice, and she knew she'd found her place, her people, her home. Paragraph 8. The storm passed, leaving the desert refreshed, the air clean and sharp with the scent of wet sage. Leela walked through the village, her feet sinking into the softened earth, her hands signing greetings to the children who ran past, their laughter a vibration she felt in her chest. The giant walked beside her, his stride slow, his eyes scanning the horizon as if guarding against unseen threats. The villagers rebuilt what the storm had damaged, their hands working in harmony, their spirits unbroken. Amos was gone, his absence a quiet relief, his drunken shadow no longer haunting Leela's steps. She'd heard whispers through signs and gestures that he'd left in the night, too weak to fight the village's strength, too broken to face his daughter's resolve. Leela felt no sorrow, only a lightness, as if the storm had washed away her past. The giant led her to a high ridge overlooking the valley, where the desert stretched endlessly, its beauty fierce and untamed. He signed, his hands deliberate, "This land speaks to those who listen." Leela nodded, her hands signing, "I hear it." They stood in silence, the wind carrying the scent of renewal, the sun warming their faces. The village below buzzed with life, its people a family Leela had never known she could have. The giant pulled a small pendant from his pouch, a carved stone strung on leather, and placed it in Leela's hand. "For strength," he signed, and she clutched it, her eyes brimming with gratitude. She signed back, asking if he'd stay, and he smiled, his hands signing, "As long as you need me." The desert seemed to hum with approval, its vastness a mirror of Leela's newfound freedom. She turned to the village, her heart full, knowing she'd found her voice in the silence, her place in the world. The giant stood beside her, a protector, a friend, and together they faced the future, the desert stretching before them like a promise of endless possibilities.